Here's a tip for haltering your horse in a more effective and safer way. You always halter from the left side, and what a lot of people do, they make the mistake of trying to put the nose band on first and then flipping the crown piece over to buckle. But if your horse is in a big pasture with a lot of horses, it can be really easy for them to leave you like that. So the best way to catch a horse is to actually take your right arm over top of their neck and then hand yourself the crown piece, and now you have them. Then you can put the nose band on and adjust it. You want to make sure that everything looks nice and orderly, and then you'll buckle it to the snuggest hole that it's not too tight, and you always want to make sure to really fasten it properly. You don't want to leave the tail hanging out. It's really important to know how to tie your horse properly. A lot of accidents happen because horses are tied improperly or not in a safe way. One of the first things is making sure that you're tying to something safe. It needs to be secure, and it needs to always be higher than your horse's withers. If you tie your horse to something that's lower than their withers, then there's a chance that if they step back, they could really injure themselves. So for safety's sake, you want to always make sure that you tie high. To safely and securely tie your horse, you'll put the lead rope over the object that you're securing it to, and you're going to want to make a little bit of a cross circle here and then put a loop through and just keep looping it back to itself until you get to the end, and that way you have a nice slip knot and it's easy for you to get it undone. Now if you have a horse that tends to pull on the lead rope and gets themselves untied, then you can just take the very tail end and just stick it through the very last loop so it's a little bit more secure and your horse can't get it untied. So you have 3 important tools for getting dirt, dust, and mud off of your horse. The first is a metal curry comb. Now I would use this very carefully. A lot of people are a little bit rough with it, and you have to remember that horse's skin is very sensitive. Okay, so I only use this just to scrape off the dried on caked mud. The next is going to be a soft curry or a rubber curry brush. This is for getting any other mud. It helps get stains out, dirt, dust, all of that kind of stuff, loose hair. And then you'll have your regular dandy brush. And then this is for after you've gotten all the mud and dirt out from beneath the coat, then you can just brush it away. Okay. With a metal curry brush, you want to just gently glide it across the top of the horse's coat to get any caked on mud or excess dirt off. With a rubber curry brush, you're going to massage in a circular motion, and this really helps to get any extra shedding hair or dust or dirt off, and it actually is also really good for improving the circulation in your horse, kind of a little bit of a warm-up before you go to ride. After all the mud and everything's off, you can use your soft dandy brush to just glide it all away. And you always want to go the direction that the coat is growing, unless like on the horse's legs. Since I don't like to use a metal curry brush on the horse's legs, if there's some mud, you can cross fiber your dandy brush to help get any mud or extra dirt off that didn't come off with your rubber curry brush. You always want to be sure to brush your horse's legs, all 4 of them. And as you're brushing your horse's legs, check them for any signs of heat or swelling or any weird bumps or anything like that. This is kind of your checkup on your horse to make sure that there's nothing funny going on with their legs. So you'll brush the whole horse, top to bottom, with your dandy brush, and pay special careful attention to where the saddle goes and where the girth goes. I also recommend keeping a washcloth or small towel at the barn so you can wipe your horse's eyes and nose. When it comes to brushing manes and tails, a lot of people are causing more harm than good. So what I recommend is using a lot of detangler and a really soft brush. If you use a hard brush or a comb, then you're actually ripping your horse's mane out as you're trying to brush out the knots. And so a lot of horses have really thin and short manes for that reason. So use a lot of detangler on your knots and use a really soft brush and a lot of patience to get all the knots out, and your horse's mane will start to grow a lot longer than you thought it could. Here. When using the soft brush, I'll take a segment of mane, and if there's a lot of knots in it, then start down at the bottom and work your way up. And I do both the back side and the front side. And then work my way up the whole mane. It's also very important to make sure that you clean your horse's feet out almost every day, or at least every time before you ride. So you always want to be facing the back, and you're going to run your hand down the back of the horse's leg, and your horse should pick it up for you. If they don't, you can lean into them to get the weight off. And what I'm looking for is there's a triangle in the middle that you're going to see called the frog, and I'm looking to pick out on either side of the frog. And there's no rocks in these grooves, and there's no thrush either. If there's icky black stuff, then that's thrush, and you're going to want to get a medication for it. And if there's any rocks or anything, you want to make sure to pry those out, but otherwise it looks good. Cleaning out a back hoof can feel a lot different, but it actually is very much the same. Just going to run your hand down the back of the horse's hind leg, and just hold and wait for him to get steady. There he goes. And see how I hold the foot not from the front of the leg? That's going to be a little bit more uncomfortable for your horse. So I make sure that I'm holding it, I'm wrapping around and holding it underneath, and I'm giving him a lot of support here.
Especially in this cold weather, more than ever, it's really important to make sure that our horses are really stretched out and warmed up before we ask them to work. One of the ways to do that is with carrot stretches before you get saddled up. So I'm going to just show you a couple of different angles for carrot stretches, and I hope that you will use them with your horse every day. The first is to go to the side, and I'm just going to have him stretch back, and if he moves around, I'm not going to give it to him until he'll stand still. Good boy. And he has to stretch all the way back to the flank. Good boy. Now, not all of your horses are going to be quite that athletic, but if you keep working on it and you stretch them every day, they'll be able to keep stretching a little more and a little more. So he already knows the routine. Next, we're going to go between his legs. Good boy. Make sure you do it evenly to both sides. And be careful when you do the one between their legs, make sure that your lead rope isn't so loose that they can put a foot through it. So just make sure that you keep that lead rope a little bit tight. The next one I'm going to do is just bring him back to his chest. Really watch your fingers on this one. Good boy. And lastly, I'm going to get him to stretch his neck forward. Good boy.
When saddling your horse, the placement of the saddle in relationship to the pad is really important. A lot of people try to line the pad and the saddle up to the front, and that's not a very good way to do it because your pad will kind of get kicked out the back and you can end up sliding out from underneath your saddle. So you always want to make sure that you line up your pad and your saddle on the back, that the pad isn't any further behind the saddle. The other thing is making sure that the pad and saddle both are in front of the flank. That's this area right here where the hair grows the opposite direction. And so you want to make sure that everything stays in front of that. You don't ever want your saddle to come behind that because then it's going to start to interfere with the movement of the hips. When you go to put your rigging together, anything that you have on your saddle, whether you have a back cinch or a croup strap or a breast collar or any of that kind of stuff, you always make sure that you put your front cinch on first, because that's what's going to actually secure your saddle, and then when you go to put your saddle away, you take it off last. So just go a couple loops through here with the latigo. And then I'll pull it a little bit snug. Now the first time, I don't like to get it too tight because I'll tighten it up before I get on, but I've got it a little bit snug, and then I also make sure to put it through one of the holes so that way it's really secure, and I'm not going to let the excess latigo hang. I'm going to make sure it goes up in the keeper here, or you can even put it through your D-ring. Then after you've done that, you can go to your back cinch. Now the back cinch shouldn't be as tight as the front cinch is, but it can be kind of snug. You also don't want it hanging too low because then they could get a hind foot caught in it. Once you've done those two things, then you can add on any croup straps or breast collars that you have. One of my big pet peeves that is really unsafe is people trying to bridle their horses while they're tied up. Whether they leave the halter on completely or they just put the halter down around their neck and then try to bridle them, it's really unsafe. You never know what your horse might do while you're trying to bridle them. They could very easily toss their head, even if they're a really good horse. Sometimes the bit hits them wrong and they toss their head, and you definitely don't want to have them tied or have the halter around their neck while you're trying to do that. It's very unsafe. So you're going to make sure you can keep the halter around their neck is fine, but you want to make sure that your horse is untied and that the lead rope is in your hands. So I'll put the reins over his neck so they're not hanging down. And one tip that I have for you, especially if your horse has trouble bridling or you have trouble getting the bit in their mouth or anything like that, one way to make your life so much easier is when you go to put the bit in the horse's mouth, just have a little piece of sugar and he'll be picking it up by himself in no time. So I just put my thumb through the ring of the snaffle and then I hold the sugar cube and the bars of the bit in the palm of my hand, and I let him pick it up. And you do this a couple of times and your horse will be picking the bit up out of your hand with no problem. So that's a really good tip if you have a horse that's hard to bridle or kind of balks at the bridle or won't open their mouth. If you use a foot latch or a noseband or anything else, go ahead and make sure that all of your straps are secure. And they should all be tucked away neatly into their keepers. You don't want to have a lot of extra straps hanging around. That's a really good way to end up with it getting undone accidentally by rubbing against something. If you do use a noseband, you always want to make sure that you can easily fit 2 fingers in between the noseband and the horse's face. You never want it any tighter than 2 fingers. One of the other pet peeves that I have that I really hate when people do because it is so dangerous and so incredibly unsafe is when they've bridled their horse and they just leave the halter, whether you have a nylon halter or rope halter, doesn't matter, and they leave it hanging here. Even if it's in a designated tie-up area or if it's on a fence or a trailer or anything, it doesn't matter. It is so easy for a horse, if a horse gets loose or anything, and it's so easy for a horse to get a foot through here, and then their foot is tied up, and it's really dangerous, and it could really injure a horse. So take the 5 seconds after you've bridled and moved your horse. Really, you should have it untied when you go to bridle them anyway, but make sure that you take it off. Even if you leave it on the ground, is much safer, because at least then if it gets caught, then your horse's leg isn't tied up to a rail or a trailer or something. So make sure, please do not leave your halters tied up. When you go to untack your horse, you're going to want to put the halter around his neck so you have something to control him with a little bit before you take his bridle off. And then you'll make sure that all necessary straps are undone, your noseband, throat latch. Then what I'm going to recommend you do, take your reins and the whole bridle in one hand, put your left hand on top of his nose, and that'll just keep him a little bit more steady with you so he can't toss his head while you're taking it off. But I'm just going to slide it over his ears and let it come out of his mouth as he wants to. It's a little itchy. Yeah. After that, then I'll go ahead and put his halter on completely. And again, you want to make sure that it's nice and snug and that you've done the buckle completely. Good boy. Just the opposite of how you put the saddle on is how you're going to take it off. So any croup straps, breast collars, anything like that, get undone first. Then you can go ahead and swing your stirrup up on top so it's out of the way. You'll undo the back cinch. And then last is your front cinch. Again, this is what actually secures your saddle. So it always goes on first and off last. Now I'm going to show you how I like to secure the latigo to keep it really neat and orderly for next time. I'm going to take the latigo about maybe 1/4 to 1/3 of the way down, and I'm going to put it through the back. So it's kind of doubled over itself with a couple of loops right there. Then I'm going to take the tail end and do a little cowboy knot. Now some people do this when they secure their cinch for tacking up, and that's fine too if you don't have holes in it. But I'm going to take it from the back, cross over the front, go through the back of the D-ring. Okay, so now I've got a loop here, and I'm going to put the tail through the loop and pull it tight. And that way everything stays up, it's really secure, and so the next time that you go to put your saddle on, you don't have to worry about the latigo dragging on the ground. Then after that, we'll come around to the other side and make sure that your cinches and breast collars and anything else you have on are nice and secured. Again, you don't want anything dragging on the ground, and you want everything to be neat and orderly for the next time that you go to use your saddle. Most saddles have a keeper somewhere, and that's usually, I recommend, the best thing to do to keep your cinch and the leather on your saddle looking nice. If you don't have a keeper, you can throw it over, but I would warn you a little bit about having sweaty girths up on top of the leather of your saddle. It can wear on it after a while. But just make sure before you pull your saddle off that everything's neat and orderly and ready for next time.